The cure for hate. Deep, toxic shame can be a powerful, unhealthy motivator and lead us down a dark path of hate. But when we discover how to reconnect with humanity, we can be saved. Therefore, tune into this impactful episode with former white supremacist Tony McAleer and discover the cure for hate through radical compassion. Welcome to the Forged by Trust podcast. I'm your host, Dreeke, professional speaker, executive coach, former U.S. Marine, spy recruiter, best-selling author, and your trust and communication expert. Coming up next on the Forged by Trust podcast.
I truly believe that the level to which we dehumanize other human beings, the level to which we hate other people, is a mere reflection of our own internal disconnection, dehumanization. And so at the root of this dehumanization is toxic shame. And toxic shame is an alienation of the self, and it's the feeling that we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, we're less than, we're weak, we're powerless, we're unlovable, that we develop about ourselves. So we become conscious of every moment and our actions and our choices in every moment, and we incorporate the 3 C's of curiosity, courage, and compassion into those actions and choices. We can make a difference and impact the world in ways we can't even imagine.
Welcome to the Forged by Trust podcast. My name is Dreeke, and I'm honored to be your host. The Forged by Trust podcast is a show where we explore the essential skill of forging trust for building an innovative culture and exceptional leadership. Join us as we delve into the behavior skills and communication techniques required for success and learn from the best in the industry. Our guests include spies, spy recruiters, master interrogators, best-selling authors, thought leaders, and innovators who will share their insights on building teams, partnerships, and exceptional leadership by forging trust. As your host, a global behavior expert and master spy recruiter, I will guide you through the process of building authentic connections based on trust. Stop settling for less and learn how to master communication skills you need to move beyond transactional relationships and into mutually beneficial collaboration and partnerships. Whether you're a student, entrepreneur, C-suite executive, or parent, forging trust is the key to unlocking your potential. Today's episode, The Cure for Hate, is with the compelling Tony McAleer. Tony spent 15 years in the white supremacist and neo-Nazi movements, starting as a skinhead and evolving to leadership positions, and was instrumental in ushering in the internet, building one of the first white supremacist websites for resistance records in the mid-90s. Tony's expertise is gleaned from receiving over 1,000 hours of one-on-one and group counseling to understand his own process. Tony has spent countless hours coaching and mentoring change in others and is a certified life coach. Tony's been involved in Life After Hate since its inception in 2011 and served as executive director from 2013 to 2017, while Life After Hate developed its online support groups and the Exit USA program. In 2017, he became board chair until his departure in December 2019. Tony's worked closely informing law enforcement and government institutions, helping them grapple with the rising problem of violent white supremacist groups. He is the author of The Cure for Hate, a former white supremacist, journey from violent extremism to radical compassion. During today's episode, we talk about what makes people susceptible to hate groups, shame and powerlessness, discovering how to reconnect with humanity, curing deep, toxic shame, the cure for hate, and radical compassion. Hey, Tony, welcome to Forged by Trust. I can't thank you enough for joining me in the audience today and sharing your compelling story.
Thank you for having me.
It's a true pleasure. I got to give a shout out to our mutual friend, Dov Barron, who was tremendous on my show. We've been friends for a number of years. I know you've been friends with him for a very long time. And he is a profound, deep, impactful soul. So I give great thanks to him at the beginning of this. And for folks listening, make sure you tune into Dov's episode, because actually Dov talks about Tony on that episode as well. So I've been thinking really deeply about the title of our episode today, and that's The Cure for Hate. And all of us tend to have these amazing backstories to become who we are today. And a lot of times that backstory starts in a place where the thing we eventually master in life is our greatest challenge that we have earlier in life. And all of a sudden we have this life-affirming event that kind of flips the script on us, and we dive deeply into that great challenge and we overcome it and then master it. And I think you are most likely one of the most profoundly impacted person by that kind of story. And that is, the cure for hate. So if you would, start us on that journey. Where did the journey for understanding and discovering the cure of hate come from?
Well, I think if we want to talk about curing hate, we need to understand what it is and what it is, how we define it. And for me, I truly believe that the level to which we dehumanize other human beings, how the level to which we hate other people, is a mere reflection of our own internal disconnection, dehumanization. At its root, really, it's rooted in self-loathing and self-hatred. So how does that hatred get there, right? How do we get to that place of self-loathing and self-hatred? And for me, we would have to go back to my childhood. And I grew up, contrary to popular belief, I wasn't raised a white supremacist or neo-Nazi. I didn't come from a broken home. There was lots of family dysfunction, but that's par for the course. I didn't come from a poor or disadvantaged family. I came from a middle class, upper middle class, affluent family in Vancouver, Canada, of all places. Who'd have thought? My father was a doctor. I went to private schools. And if I think back to who little Tony was, who was the little guy that came into the world, who was the core essence of who I am today. And that was this bright, curious, sensitive, open to the world, a little mischievous, a little bit stubborn little guy. And we come into the world and life happens to us. And we learn it's not safe to be open. It's not safe to be sensitive. And so we put on armor, in order to feel safe and to protect ourselves from hurt.
You mentioned not feeling safe. Do you remember the first time you experienced not feeling safe, what that was?
I don't know if I can remember the first time, but I know the most significant time.
Okay.
And that was, and it's probably, yeah. When I was 9, I walked in on my dad with another woman, and he was a god to me. He was, as parents are, we think they're these infallible, amazing human beings when we're young, and we go through so at some point in our lives, we realize God comes off the pedestal, and we realize they're all too human. I walked in on my dad with another woman, and when that happened, my whole world got turned upside down, and I lost faith and trust in all the authority figures in my life. And that was a very unsettling and unsafe feeling. There's no stability, there's no security in the relationships you have with the adult world, and at the age of 9. And I went from getting A's and B's at an all-boys Catholic school to getting C's and D's. And the school tried many carrots to try and incentivize me to get good grades. And when that didn't work, with my parents' full knowledge and consent, they settled on the stick. And if I didn't get A's and B's on major tests and assignments, I was marched down to the teacher's office, and I had to go in, put my hands on the edge of his desk, and get hit on the rear end with a yardstick. And that happened.
If it's too horrible to remember and think about, what was your dad's or your parents' reaction to you discovering him? What was their response to you?
His response was, he was worried about whether I was going to tell my mom, which I did. He wanted to know if I wanted to meet the woman, which I didn't. I had no desire to. And even, later on, I think in defending his actions to my mom, he said, well, at least I didn't yell at him. Like, I'm thinking, like, there was a disconnect. And I've come to have compassion for my father because I know his childhood. I know his journey.
Sure.
And I understand it. And I just want to be very clear here. Everything I did that I did in my 15 years in the white supremacist movement, I chose to do.
Right.
And I have to accept responsibility for that. I hold myself accountable for that. And nothing is an excuse.
Right.
The reason I share the things that happened in my childhood is so you can understand the lens through which I made those decisions.
Right. Of course.
And so it's very important to say that. But in that office, I was introduced to shame and powerlessness.
How so?
And over again. I can think of when I knew what was about to happen to me, wanting to be anywhere else but there in that office. I know that, but there was nothing I could do about it. I couldn't stop what was happening to me. I couldn't stop the violation. And, I'm sure there's many of your listeners can think of a time where you knew something really bad was about to happen and there's nothing you can do about it. That is at the root of powerlessness.
Right.
And so I became really even more angry and acting out, and stopped listening to Queen and Elton John and started listening to the Clash and the Sex Pistols and getting into the whole punk music scene. And, within that scene, there was skinheads, right? These.
And help me with context also on Tony. What's the time frame? What years were these around?
When I was in that teacher's office, I was 11. By the time I was in the punk scene and meeting skinheads, it was 15, 16. I was in 3 different high schools in 4 years.
And what years were that?
82, 83.
Okay, early 80s. Okay, thank you.
Early 80s. And I was in this movement from the early 80s to the late 90s.
Okay.
And, and I was drawn to these skinheads. And I remember the first time I met these skinheads in Vancouver, they were going to beat me up and rob me for my Doc Martens. And because they were in England, where I got them from, they were a dime a dozen. In North America, they're really expensive. And
you said drawn to them. What made you feel drawn to them, do you think?
Yeah, and my parents asked the same question. They're like, Tony, you've got your whole life. You've got all this advantage and privilege ahead of you, yet you're hanging around with these guys who have no hope. And they had the one thing that I didn't have: toughness. I was a sensitive kid. I wasn't tough. I didn't win fights in the schoolyard. And those 2 guys that were going to rob me on one day, my bullying survival strategy was befriend the bully, become the bully. And they became my best friends. And in order to have their protection, I had to have their respect. And in order to have their respect, I had to commit all the same violence that they did. And what I was drawn to was their toughness, their capacity for violence, and the fact that people were afraid of them. Nobody was ever afraid of me. And when I was with them, people were afraid of me, not because of me, but because of the guy standing next to me. And the adrenaline rush and winning a fight for the first time, with obvious help, that feeling of doling out violence instead of being on the receiving end, that false sense of power that came with that, juxtaposed to that feeling of absolute powerlessness in that teacher's office, was intoxicating. And I liked it. And that was what the draw was. They had the one thing that I didn't, but craved. I wished I could have stopped the teacher in that office. I couldn't. I was too weak. And that's the draw for movements and organizations like this. And it went beyond sort of random skinhead stuff into more established and evolved, organized white supremacist neo-Nazi groups.
And if I could take a second again, I want to go back in time a little bit again.
Sure.
Before the horrendous event when you're 9 years old, what were your interests? What were you into? What caught your eye? Because you said you're curious. What were your curiosities about?
All kinds of things. The teachers used to remark at school, like, he has a remarkable general knowledge. His general knowledge about stuff is incredible. Like, I just was curious about why. My mom used to always say, like, I used to always ask the question, why? Well, this is why. Well, why is that? Well, because of this. Well, why is that? I was always asking why about things. And maybe it's just the way my brain was wired. But I was always curious about how the world worked and different aspects of it. And I would rabbit hole and get obsessed with things like acid rain when I was in grade 3 and different things. But I just had this general curiosity and developed a general knowledge that was far ahead of my school years.
Right. Can you tell me about your mom?
Yeah, she was a flight attendant. So that was her first night away as a flight attendant that I walked in on my dad with another woman. And so she was in this relationship. And the challenge with my mom and my father's infidelity was that I became my mom's primary emotional relationship.
Right.
A spouseified child, which in turn pushed my father further away, and he became jealous of me. So it was this sort of triangle of sort of dysfunction that had me craving the attention and approval of my father, but was never able to get it. And it wasn't until I was probably in my 40s and after many, I probably did 1,000 hours of one-on-one and group counseling with dogs,
Right.
and I finally got to the point where, it's so much of our suffering comes in life from trying to get or expecting to receive something from someone who's incapable of giving it in the first place.
Oh my gosh. So profound. Yeah. You're so right.
How crazy is that? I realized it, once I could develop a compassion for myself and my journey in life, and I looked at my father's eyes rather than anger at not loving me or not giving me attention or approval, when I understood where that came from in his childhood and had compassion for it. And once I did that, my expectation, I no longer had the expectation that I needed him to give that to me.
Right.
And a great peace settled over that part of my life and my relationship with my dad. It's, expecting somebody to give you something they're not capable of giving, that's like insanity.
Right. It's also great empathy that you learned.
Yeah. And the more we develop empathy with ourselves, the more we can recognize the humanity in others. And the more we can connect and recognize the humanity in others, the more I could connect with the humanity in myself. And it's this sort of feedback loop of self-discovery and self-humanization that took me out of living in a place where I was disconnected completely from the humanity in others and disconnected completely from the humanity. And, it really, what is the cure for that disconnection? And then what I've learned along this path is the answer is compassion.
Right.
And for me, compassion showed up in three major ways. The first was the birth of my daughter and my son 15 months later. And, they, before they could speak the word compassion, but before they had any understanding of what it meant or what it looked like, they looked at and saw the humanity in me. I could see it reflected back at me through their eyes, through their facial expressions. So they saw this great, amazing dad. When I didn't see that when I looked in the mirror.
Right.
Right. I saw someone who was deeply flawed. And so at the root of this dehumanization is toxic shame. And toxic shame is an alienation of the self. And it's the feeling that we're not good enough. We're not smart enough. We're less than, we're weak, we're powerless, we're unlovable. That we develop about ourselves that deep in our subconscious identity belief system that happens through experiences that we witness or have happened to us or people tell us stuff. And we live our lives in reaction to that. And, Dr. James Gilligan, who was a forensic psychiatrist in San Quentin, I think, or one of the California federal penitentiaries, said that toxic shame was at the root of violence. And he wasn't aware of a major serious act of violence in prison that wasn't rooted in shame and humiliation.
Oh, yeah.
And he said all violence is an attempt to convert shame into self-esteem.
Yeah, we've had shame as a topic on the show before as well.
Yeah.
I'm curious. So little Tony, as you call him, sensitive young guy. I know where you were really young back then when this all happened, but with these interests you had, did you have any semblance of the path you wanted to walk at all? I know it was young. I'm just kind of curious.
Astronauts, there's all kinds of different things that, wanted to be a doctor like my dad, those
Right.
sort of all these curious things. But a lot of that got disconnected and snuffed out.
All right.
At an early enough age that it never really came to a fruition. So when I went to university, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I wasn't connected to any deeper desire. I'd lost complete contact with little Tony.
Yeah. So that kind of, and thank you for taking a few minutes to kind of frame this background for me to understand and get context. All right. So we've had this experience with the two bullies who now became our best friends, and we're being drawn into these organizations that make us feel powerful because we didn't feel in control or having power earlier. This is high school time frame. So, and you talked about a second ago that you did go to university. So bring us up to speed right in high school, where that time frame and getting drawn more into letting go of little Tony.
Yeah, I was a smart kid. I wasn't a tough kid, and intellectually, and I had this great intellectual curiosity and appetite, and was very well read. So I was an intellectual big fish in a very small pond.
And you say intellectually well read. What would you like reading? Do you remember?
Oh, just all kinds of stuff. I mean, when I started to get into the white power thing, I read Mein Kampf. I read philosophy of National Socialism and what the different strands of fascism look like. And I took an intellectual curiosity and wanting to understand it. And so did this deep dive, which kind of made me dangerous, because when people wanted to come and confront me with ideas, I was able to bring to bear, if you try and argue with someone who's read all the numbers and can articulate them, and you don't really know them, it's not a fair context. Even if they're wrong, you can't really argue with someone who's got that much
depth of field. You had depth of field.
depth of field, and so that was my skill set that got me the admiration of these guys that were very capable of violence, but none of them had anywhere near close the depth of field that I did. And so that's what allowed me to step into that leadership position. And then I started to, I became very ideologically driven and took it from random street violence and started organizing it and reaching out and connecting with groups like Aryan Nations and White Aryan Resistance, and really starting to build it into a broader coalition of organizations, and taking my curiosity around technology and starting a computerized phone line that was like a voicemail system, and using that to spread messages. And
so I'm curious, Tony, with these other people that were in these organizations that you're now organizing and part of, we know what drew you into it. What do you think drew all them into it?
That's a great question. And invariably it follows these similar themes. And the thing that your listeners might be most surprised to hear, it's not about the ideology primarily. The ideology is a part of it. The ideology is a pill we have to swallow in order to get these deeper psychic needs met. So when I think about myself, why did I join? Why did I get so involved? I got power when I felt powerless. I got attention when I felt invisible. And I got acceptance when I felt unlovable. And I got purpose and meaning where I had none. And those are the deeper drivers that make people vulnerable. Why do some people listen to the ideology and say, oh, that's nonsense? And why do some people listen to the ideology and spend time with these groups, and all of a sudden it's their primary social circle, and they become really into the social movement? It's because they have these vulnerabilities. That's what separates a person. And invariably, I've learned that almost everyone that's involved in these movements has those vulnerabilities. There's some research done out of the University of Maryland in their studies of terrorism and responses to terrorism. They looked at former extremists and looked at a series of questions and data from them. And the number one correlated factor in the history of somebody joining a violent extremist group was childhood trauma.
Right. And
that the average American has 15% of the population has 2 or more adverse childhood events. 2. 66% of the extremist population has 4 or more. And what do these adverse childhood events do? What does the trauma do when the scar heals and the memories fade? They leave behind the mark of shame and toxic shame. And that's what drives the behavior. That's what drives the antisocial behavior. That's what drives the violence, the physical violence, the verbal violence, the emotional violence. It also drives self-harm, addiction, as you've probably covered in your show. So in order to get these deeper psychic needs met, and I'll tell you this quick little story.
Yeah.
I co-founded an organization called Life After Hate in 2010 and was there for about 10 years. And we was 6 former leaders in the white supremacist movement, and we went to go and help people leave these movements behind, to help the people who are where we once were, because those programs didn't exist when we tried to leave. And I got a letter in 2018 from a mother who was worried about her son. Her son was neurodivergent. I think he had Asperger's syndrome, and was spending a lot of time in his room, and he'd really become quite involved online with this white nationalist group. I don't remember which one it was. And she said, I'm really worried about my son. He's spending all this time with him. And she said, what terrifies me most is these white nationalists have embraced and accepted my son in a way that no one has in his entire life. When he was 12 in grade 7, he invited his entire class to come to his birthday party, and nobody showed up. you think about the deep psychic need that child has. And one of the strategies that these groups use is to love bomb people.
Yeah.
And to, cocoon them in love and acceptance and pats on the back and a social circle and belonging and to feed that psychic need. I think that child would believe the earth was flat if that's the ideology he had to believe in order to get those needs met.
Yeah.
We will, the ego will twist and rationalize anything in order to get these deep needs met. And so that's a great sort of example to sort of highlight the psychic needs driving people getting involved in these groups as opposed to the intellectual ones. The challenge is once people are in these groups and they've swallowed the ideology, ideology and identity become intertwined.
Were you able to save that guy?
I didn't work with that guy. It was passed on to someone it required deeper level of family and stuff like that. But we've helped 700 or 800 people leave groups behind.
Jeez. All right. So so many rabbit holes I'm going down. I apologize. I'll bring us back on the main track. So we're in college. We're studying. What are we studying?
Sciences, psychology.
And what did you want to do besides lead the Aryan Nation?
When I was 18, I wanted to be a brewmaster.
Oh, okay.
And I looked at, what do I need? I need a biochemistry or microbiology degree, and I'll go to this place in Edinburgh where you could get a technical degree and then go work in a brewery. And I think my dad brewed his own beer growing up, and it was a way for me to false bond with my father. It's remarkable when I think about that, how that relationship with my father impacted things, because as I got involved with these different organizations, they all had father figures that would give me all the attention, acceptance, and approval, the pats on the back from these father figures by acting out and overachieving, doing movement and political stuff.
Right.
That I kept doing more and more of it in order to get that attention and approval from the father figure that I could never get from my own father. And people say, well, did you learn this stuff at home? I said, my dad was bombed by the Nazis during World War II in Liverpool. Nice. I said, it's a funny way to be angry at your father to put a poster of the guy who sent the bombs on your bedroom wall.
Right.
And the only thing worse than my dad's negative attention was his indifference. And if I couldn't get positive attention from him, I could easily provoke and needed to provoke negative attention just to get attention.
Right. All right. So we got through college. What was next?
Then this sort of became a career for me.
How does that become a career? How does hate become a career?
Well, it becomes when it becomes identity, it wasn't just what I believed. It was who I hung out with. It was what I read, what I watched, what I wrote. Everything I did was all consuming. Sure, I had jobs to pay the bills, but everything went towards furthering this goal. It became an obsession. And
what kind of jobs did you have? Because I'm seeing like two parallel lives you had. Was this white supremacy thing something you were hiding? Were you broadcasting it? And what kind of jobs did you get? How did that impact jobs? I mean, how did you function in society, or was it completely accepted and fine the way you were living?
It became less and less possible to function. I know when I was a skinhead, I was working with a sort of small bond dealer in the investment world, and I really didn't have much interest in that. And so I drifted out of that. But for, I think, about 7 years, of all things, I was an exterminator. I did pest control.
All right. So we're doing pest control and running the Aryan Nation. It's what a dichotomy. All right. So
not exactly what my parents had in mind.
Well, yeah, actually, that's a great point. What were they thinking, and what was going on with your parents' relationship at this time with you?
I don't think my relationship with my dad ever fully recovered. I was pretty estranged from him, but my mom always kept the door open a crack. I think my mom's love for me was unconditional. Her relationship with me was very conditional.
Did they know what you were doing?
Yeah, no, because it was on TV and it was in the newspapers, and it was, I was sort of the spokesman and local leader of this stuff. So it brought all kinds of unwanted attention and shame upon the family.
Wow.
They hated it.
And did they stay together?
Until about 10 years ago. So.
All right. So we're now doing this. What's next?
Then I find myself in the delivery room. It wasn't with the mother, it wasn't a healthy relationship. I was in the middle of breaking up with her for about the 15th time after 3 months into our relationship, when she told me she was pregnant. So I find myself in the delivery room, and
How old were you now?
22.
Oh, still very young, right?
Yeah. And I get, the nurse hands me this little baby girl, and I'm the first to sort of hold her. And, she's tiny and fragile, and I'm worried about we're going to drop her. I'm going to sort of hurt her in some way. And I'm terrified of what to do next. And she's got this little scrunchy face and she opens her eyes for the first time. And I know that my face was the first picture her brain took. And something happened to me in that delivery room, and it started at the tip of my head and went down through the bottom of my feet. And I knew I was a different person leaving that room than when I entered. I had no idea what that change was. But I know that in that moment, when she opened her eyes, I connected with another human being since I couldn't remember when, because up until that point, I was completely disconnected from my heart. I didn't operate. I suppressed any feeling. Right. That I hadn't operated from head, mind, ego, and I was a complete narcissist.
Right.
And with the birth of my daughter, and I had a son 15 months later, same mother.
Same mother.
Yeah. I won't get into that, but fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice.
Little Tony's making interesting choices, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But the best in the end, what looked like the worst choice of I could be making turned out to be actually the best choice. And I remember my son coming back from the movies. My kids are 15 and 16 at the time, and with a friend. And my dad goes, "Hey, Dad, were we planned?" And I said, "Oh, absolutely, son. I just wasn't aware of the plan."
Perfect. All right. So your daughter's born. She melts your heart, and you're not aware of that. The melting began. What was next?
The melting began, and my son 15 months later, and I got to parent them the way that I always wanted to be parented, which was very cathartic. I gave them all the attention and approval that I never got, and that was very
okay. So help me understand how you were able to do that. So here you are, you're a leader of the Aryan nation, and you're an exterminator and a single dad. What did that look like, that you're able to give them something that you didn't have?
There was a lot of dysfunction there. Like this was not the model scenario to raise children. There's definitely dysfunction there. And this is where my mom comes in the relationship with my mom, who, as I said, loved me unconditionally, but her relationship with me was very conditional. And when I was 2 and 4, when they were 2 and 4, I separated from the mother. And when they were 4 and 6, she left the country to pursue a relationship. And there I was, this single father with 2 children who could barely look after his own life. And so she taught me a very important thing about compassion. And my children gave me this really great lesson in compassion. And they taught me that, when we're compassionate with someone, we hold a mirror up and allow them to see their humanity reflected back at them when they can't see it on their own. And that's what my children gave to me, in the way that they looked at me and treated me, seeing this great parent that I couldn't see when I looked in the mirror. My mom taught me the second really important lesson about compassion, and that is compassion is truly, truly powerful when it's combined with healthy boundaries and consequences. And so she leveraged that relationship, the conditional part of the relationship. I needed her help. She knew I needed her help. And she used that to, her help was conditional on lessening my involvement in the social circles, lessening my activities, not doing television interviews, and sort of use that, tough love approach of healthy boundaries and consequences to sort of steer me away from that world. And,
and what was your response when she was trying to do that?
Resistance. right? Because this was my identity. This was
Right.
who I was. And that's the challenge is if you try and talk to somebody and say, hey, here's the facts on immigration. Immigration actually benefits the country. The problem is ideology and identity are intertwined. And when we are trying to attack a person's belief system, we actually also unwittingly attacking their identity.
Right.
That doesn't go down without a fight. People shut down, people, overreact or get angry, or there's all kinds of coping behaviors to deal with an identity attack. So that didn't work. But what the children did was to sort of to soften and melt that behind. And it's completely unfair, but in the 90s, single dads were like unicorns.
Right.
So, oh my God, you're a single dad. Oh, that's fantastic. I get, getting all these pats on the back. No single mother in the 90s got a pat on the back for being a single mother.
Right.
And so I started to get healthy attention, acceptance, and approval for being a single dad. At the same time, I'm struggling to give up and clinging to this identity over here.
And I'm sorry, Tony, I got another, as I'm painting these pictures, I'm curious about you and your mom at this point, because she's playing a pretty critical role in this, and she's doing something with you that she's steering your behavior that's attacking your identity, and yet she's still in your life. You haven't shut her out. What was she doing, or what was the driving force and how was she riding that balance, you think, of starting to turn the rudder of your ship without you saying get overboard?
Because I needed her help raising the children.
So that was the leverage. That was it.
One thing for me to tell my mom to get lost, but I have to tell her to get lost, and I have to tell her to get lost on behalf of my children as well. And that was very difficult to do. Up until that point, if you'd asked me when I was 20, I would have said I'll be dead or in jail as a white revolutionary by the age of 30, and I'm fine with that. When I had 2 children, I couldn't honestly say I'd be fine with that. It wasn't fair to them. And the activities that I was doing was starting to impact, or always did impact, their quality of their life. The ability for me to be a provider was impaired by my activities over there. It limited social circles. I had my mom take them to preschool so that other parents wouldn't think, oh, well, you can't hang out with those kids because look who his dad is.
Right.
There was all kinds of complications in my children's life that they didn't deserve that. They didn't ask for it. And,
right.
As much as I would have presented like a sociopath, I wasn't a sociopath. Right. That was just I'm not feeling this. I'm, a manual disconnection from my feelings. I still had a conscience underneath. I still felt guilty. I still felt connected to these children and wanted to see the best for them. And there was a conflict between what I was doing and what was best for the children. And my mom leveraged that conflict and in a masterful way. It wasn't easy, didn't happen overnight.
Right.
But it was just that constant pushing on the rudder until the direction of the ship started to change. And the more distance there was between me and that movement and those social groups, the less the psychic bonds to the people, and the less power that it had over my life, and the more my children came to prominence. When my children were born, white supremacist political stuff was number one. Children were number two, like that. But slowly, the children, and rightfully so, they should be number one.
Right.
Became number one, and as distance happened, it became less and less important to me. And the more I was able to step into the identity of single father, the more that became important to me. And I still kept the same beliefs, but when I decided to leave those movements behind and focus on my children, what I said to myself, how I self-rationalized it, was I said that, I'm definitely not going to be one of those guys that does the high school circuit. They'd only see me now, right? If I could only see me now. But, why should I fight for a bunch of white people who really couldn't care whether I lived or died?
Right.
The vast majority of white people couldn't stand who I was or what I believed in. If I really want to do something for the white race, I make sure these 2 children thrive and survive. And that was how I rationalized the pivot from being white supremacist leader to being single dad while keeping my identity intact.
Right.
Not allowed a further transition away, and that identity became less and less, and until it was non-existent.
So what do you think was the final break, if there was actually a feeling of a final break where we decided that, all right, wow, I was full of hate, I was wrong, I need to do something different? If there was one.
Yeah, because when I left the movement behind, and there was a vicious murder of a Sikh caretaker at a temple in Vancouver in 1998, and I had met the guys. I didn't really know them, but I'd met them. They were recruited by the guys I had recruited. That happened in Vancouver. That was, it wasn't for moral reasons that I was upset about it, but it was just like, that's too much. It's bad for business. That's how disconnected I was.
Right.
I saw in terms of, this is going to bring too much heat. This is, I didn't think about that poor man or his family, who I've since gotten to know in the last few years, his son-in-law and his grandson, and been very involved in the Sikh community and memorializing his memory and death. But it was something that shocked the entire community and made it easier for me to walk away. Like, things are getting out of control. I don't want any part of that, in a very sort of selfish and self-serving, narcissistic way, because that's where I was at. And so when you leave these movements behind, we call that disengagement.
Right.
When I'm not involved in the groups, I'm not involved in the activity, but I still have the beliefs.
Right.
And even though I wasn't engaged in that activity, I still had that anger and toxic shame. Had never been dealt with. And so I'm still mean to people. I was always very condescending and humorous in my deep cutting sarcasm with people. I could make people laugh, usually at someone else's expense, quite easily, but be very hurtful to that person at the same time. That was sort of the specialty, and you get that growing up in an English family anyways.
Right.
And I started a new career as a financial advisor in 2004. So I left, and Normal's murder was 1998, 2004. And I started to have some success in that. And I started to do these personal development workshops, and a friend of mine who'd been doing some work with Dov said, "Hey, you got to come to these, check out this workshop." So I started doing these workshops, and that's where I first met.
What was the spark that made you inspired to do some self-work? It takes humility. And at this point, humility might have been still kind of low.
So there was someone else in the movement in Toronto. His name was George Birdie, who was very high profile like me, very well read, quite intelligent like me. We sort of had this bond together, and he left at the same time. He was sort of disillusioned with the whole thing, and ended up, he married a woman of Indian descent, and he started to explore Buddhism and sort of Eastern mysticism and philosophy, and shared that with me. And in 2004 he came to Vancouver, and we went to a Vipassana meditation retreat together. It was his second time, my first time. For anyone who doesn't know what Vipassana meditation is, it's a 10-day silent meditation retreat. So there's no reading, no writing, no talking for 10 days. And after about 4.5 days, the monkey mind sort of settles down, and your mind is not full of constantly filling random thoughts, and you can start to learn this technique to develop a deep inner awareness. It was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. It was one of the most profound things that I've ever done, and getting to the sense of beginning to understand and experience the deeper connectedness of our consciousness and our existence, and being aware of the idea that we have a soul. I was into atheism and such when I was in the movement, and so I started to develop this spiritual curiosity, and there's the curiosity again, and it took me down these rabbit holes. There was a film that came out around the same time called What the Bleep Do We Know? That was very sort of impactful, and it was, you never could have got me into the spiritual stuff without the quantum physics end of it being introduced at the same time. Otherwise, I got no time for that woo-woo stuff, or this quantum quantum physics sort of understanding of consciousness and how the universe works and the hologram and the matrix and all that stuff.
I'm totally with you.
My analytical brain could take that, and so the spiritual stuff, comes in like a Trojan horse.
Now it all makes sense, right?
Now it all makes sense for the analytical mind, and that's how I first got into that. And Dov taught his workshops of self-development and dealing with the ego and authentic selves and all of that from, he called it quantum metapsychology, from the intersection of metaphysics, quantum physics, and psychology. And I ate that stuff up and really embraced it and started to work with it. And as I did so, my income went up, my relationships improved. I started to recognize all these wonderful benefits for that. And after about 8 months, and I'd done sort of pretty much all the different workshops, my Australian friend Damien, who'd introduced us, it's my birthday, and he gives me an envelope for my birthday, and I open up, and it's a gift certificate. It's a gift certificate for a one-on-one introductory counseling session with Dov. And I go, great, who doesn't want therapy for their birthday, right?
Right, keep going, sorry. Some people call that a clue, others just throw it out.
So I go and I sit down, with Dov, and I'm in his office, and we've got an hour, and it's engaging in small talk, and and I tell him why I'm angry at my dad and angry at my mom, and all of these things, and I pause, and I go, do I tell him the rest? Do I tell him about being a neo-Nazi and a Holocaust denier and being involved in Aryan nations and the violence and all of that? Because in my experience, when people had learned about my past, it was the end of the relationship.
Right.
In fact, when people had learned about my past, it was more than once where it was the end of an entire social circle.
Right.
It's like that, it's gone. Grab your coat, leave the house, and leave the party, and never to see those friends again.
Right.
And I accepted that as the price to pay for, all of the toxic things that I had done. So I really didn't want to tell him, because Dov's about 10 years older than me. He's from Manchester. I'm originally from around Liverpool, and we bonded over Monty Python and, quirky British humor and stuff like that. And this was a relationship I valued, I liked, we had a good rapport. I got along with him and considered him a friend. And I was terrified of losing this relationship. So I'm staring into the carpet as if the pattern in the carpet's going to give me some gem of wisdom as to what to do next. And he's like, come on, mate, just tell me. It's whatever you got to say. I can see you got something to say. Just let it out. It's okay. And I look at another aspect of the carpet and a different part of the pattern, and hopefully it's going to give me a gem of wisdom, which predictably it didn't. And he goes, mate, it's okay. You look like you're trying to swallow 3 golf balls. Just let it out. And I froze for a minute, and then in this sort of great leap of vulnerability, just opened up the floodgates and started to tell him everything. And I'm still looking at the carpet, not wanting to look him in the eye, and I look up, and as I'm telling him this stuff, and he's starting to smile. And I go, what's so funny? Here I am, here I am in my first counseling session, bearing my soul, and you're laughing at me. Like, what's so funny? And the more he smiles, the more I'm getting annoyed. And he keeps smiling. And I go, what's so funny? And he leans in with a big grin on his face and goes, I was born Jewish, right? I'm like, of course. The irony. And I go back in my chair, and he says to me, that's what you did. That's not who you are.
Right.
I see you. I see little Tony. And with that, I started bawling. My cheeks had been filled with shame, because here's this man who loves me, loves my family, wants to help me, wants to heal me. And here I am, knowing that I once advocated for the annihilation of him and his people. And as I'm sobbing with what he, the gift of his words that he just given me, and I thought to myself, if this man can learn to love me, certainly I could learn to love myself. And that began this magnificent journey towards all the pain, all the wounds, all the shame that I've been running away from my entire life. And I think by the time we'd done most of the work together, it was probably 1,000 hours of one-on-one and workshops and group counseling and stuff like that. And I wouldn't be here sitting here today if it wasn't for the tremendous work, because it wasn't easy. And there was a lot of times where I needed a kick in the pants to keep going and, to face the pain. But my God, is it a rewarding journey. It's not fun at the time.
Right.
It's not fun to go into the basement of your psyche and be shoveling all the poop out. But when it's all done and it's much cleaner than it was before, it's a much better place to be. And as I did all of that work, as I got reconnected to who little Tony was, and through the journey is coming back into integrity and alignment with the core essence of who I came into the world to be, my life became easier. My life became more and more in flow. And if I think back to the days that I spent in those movements, I couldn't have been more opposite to the essence of little Tony. And the more in that opposite place that I was, the more out of alignment I was with that, the harder my life was. Car would break down or a window would get smashed. There was all these things that were just constantly going wrong, and the drama and the anger and it was the most tiring. It takes so much energy and so much drama in being that angry all the time. And as I just worked to bring my life back and this journey of becoming, it never ends. I'm not saying that, I'm in 100% alignment, but I'm much more aligned than I was when I was back then. And there's always another layer of the onion to unpeel. But as I do that, life becomes easier and flow and great things just happen. I think as a human being, it's one of the most difficult, but one of the most rewarding journeys that we can take. And it takes great courage to go and face our demons and to face our pain and to face our wounds and to heal that. But it's such an incredibly rewarding journey.
What a tremendous amount of beautiful people that gave you amazing gifts throughout your life. It's really profound.
Fight myself.
And believe it or not, I'm looking at the spark that caused the entire thing. And that's part of the gift. I mean, you are saving people today because your father was who he was. Isn't that a strange way the universe works? Absolutely.
And then somebody, I get asked this a lot when I talk in front of people, and it's like, do you regret anything that's happened to you? Would you regret anything that you've done? And there's sort of two layers to that, that answer. The first one is, there's individuals that I harmed that I wish I could take it back. I can't. I deeply regret the things I said and did to those individuals. But at a sort of more meta level, if I just had this perfect life and came to talk to you about radical compassion and forgiveness, like, why should I listen to this guy?
Right.
Who cares, right? But having, this journey through what my mom calls, you had the journey through the dark woods.
Right.
To come out the other side, it's that contrast between where I was and where I am now that it makes the story interesting. And I couldn't, I wouldn't be here having this conversation with you and your audience if I hadn't done that journey through the dark woods. And so for that level, for that more meta level, I'm able to transform that lead into gold. So I'm an alchemist in that way, but in that level, I don't regret. It was a necessary part of the journey to bring me to this level of understanding today.
Absolutely. And so with that, we're going to jump a bunch of years here. So we had the life transformation truly took hold those years ago with Dove, where we started letting go of the hate, connecting with ourselves, starting to love ourselves and letting go of that shame. So tell me about the cure for hate. What are we doing today with it all?
So after that period of time with Dove and all the counseling, he says, like, you got to tell your story. And I've got this budding, early, having a lot of success in this financial services industry career. And I'm like terrified to go public with all this stuff because I don't want to blow that up.
Right.
But eventually I got to the point where I was like, I can't keep this inside. I have to do that. And so in 2010, I co-founded an organization called Life After Hate. And with that organization, we help get people out of hate groups. So the first section of the journey was, getting out of the movement. Next is healing the shame and the wounds that made those choices seem reasonable in the first place. Once I'd done enough of that healing work, then I was able to go back to help people who are where I once was. And so that was a decade of my life that I put to helping get people out of hate groups, undoing some of the harm that I had created. And that took me to 2019. In 2018, I had the opportunity to visit Auschwitz and spend 15 hours over 2 days, one-on-one with a guide, which we documented. And that was a profoundly impactful thing coming from a person who'd been a very articulate Holocaust denier, deeply moving. And, it's one thing to look at data in abstraction and you can pinpoint contradictions of data and make up all kinds of arguments why you think maybe it didn't happen or why people didn't land on the moon or whatever conspiracy theory you want to look at. There's always little kernels of truth inside the great lie. But going to Auschwitz and walking on that ground and spending time there, energy doesn't lie. And I was deeply moved by it. It wasn't that I wanted to go and feel Auschwitz, because every thought I'd had about Auschwitz in my previous life was devoid of feeling. It wasn't possible for me to feel. And I wanted to go there, and I was deeply moved. So, in the rooms with the artifacts, whether it be the room with the suitcases, and I was just overcome with a feeling of dread and hopelessness. That room in particular, I just felt dread and hopeless. And I thought about, those people getting off the train, it's the last stop, and realizing, oh man, this is not resettlement to the east.
Right.
The most powerful room for me was the room with 30,000 women's hair. Long hair, short hair, curly hair still in ponytails. That I was just overcome. For half an hour, just sat there in a feeling of nausea and disgust, and I was able to connect that to my own activities and feel a deep, healthy, really at a core level shame about, sure, I had an intellectual shame around the things that I had done, but it really was a powerfully moving, deep, visceral feeling that was, I think, incredibly necessary for me to experience. And so within a year or so, I'd left Life After Hate to focus on the documentary that we've made around that experience. And that's what I've been doing since December 2019. And, this third leg of my journey really is about going back to the communities that I had harmed in atonement, in reconciliation, and in an attempt to foster healing and undoing again the harms that I had done. So first I had to heal myself, then I had to help others like me heal. And then now it's going back to those communities. And in the Jewish tradition, they have a word, and it's centered around their high holy days in September. And it's a Hebrew word is called tshuva. And it means return, and it means to return to God and our fellow man through repentance for our wrongs and acts of repentance. And I've learned a lot about the Jewish tradition on forgiveness and atonement and such. So this film and this project is my tshuva to the Jewish people and other people that I harmed. But
sure,
if there's one community in this world that I've harmed the most, that was the focal point of my rage, my anger, my ideology, my propaganda, my lies, it's the Jewish people. And so that's this next leg of a journey, and to try and, not that I have it perfectly, but to inspire others to go on their own personal journey of atonement, reconciliation, and healing. And there's a lot of talk about atonement, reconciliation, but there's not a lot of examples of what healthy atonement looks like.
It's a perfect place to start wrapping us up here. And that is, what are a few things people could start doing today that you recommend to start letting go of that hate for themselves, maybe, and maybe for those around them?
Well, I think we incorporate three things into our lives. Curiosity. We become not just curiosity, we become curious about ourselves.
Right.
Who are we? Why are we like this? Why do I feel this way? Become curious about who we are and how we got to where we are. That was an important part of my journey. Curious about the other. Most people I know in hate groups have never met. They've never met a Muslim, yet they hate them, right? We what we believe about other people we've often made up, and is not any real basis. And when we can be curious about the other, we can connect to them at a human level, and the walls can come down. So curiosity is a huge impact. Compassion, I think, is and I talk in my book about radical compassion, and there's three aspects to radical compassion. Number one, our practice of compassion must take us beyond our comfort zones. The problems in this world are not going to be solved from inside our comfort zone. So if we want to change and impact the world, we have to do it from outside of our comfort zone. And that means try an act of kindness, in someone who you don't feel deserves it, someone who you don't approve of, someone you feel you are in judgment of, and see how that makes you feel, and pay attention to how it makes them feel, but pay attention to how it makes you feel. It can be profound. I think our practice of compassion must have a social activist element. If compassion is alleviating the suffering of another, we must also seek to change the environment or the society which supports or contributes to that suffering as well. So we should add a social activist component to our practice of compassion. And that journey inwards, in order to have compassion from others, we must mine it from within ourselves. If we don't have compassion for ourselves, we can't give it to others. We don't have anything to give. So we have to mine it for ourselves. And that journey inwards is one of the most courageous things a human being can do. And to take that journey inwards, and as we develop that compassion and love and acceptance for ourselves and all of our perceived flaws, we become more accepting of others and the flaws in others. And for example, for me, it wasn't through examining my own childhood that I could have any understanding of what impact my father's childhood might have had.
Right.
That took me to a place of peace in that relationship. So we must mind it in ourselves. Those three things I call the three C's. That's courage, compassion, and curiosity. And I think if we incorporate the three C's into our lives and inspire others through the three C's, because as human beings, we have this incredible ability to inspire others, for better or for worse. I spent many years inspiring people for worse. We can change the world, and it's not grandiose acts, or you have to do something which puts your life at risk. It's who we choose to be in every moment of every day is what inspires the people around us, and what is going to make a difference in how this world is. So we become conscious of every moment and our actions and our choices in every moment, and we incorporate the three C's of curiosity, courage, and compassion into those actions and choices. We can make a difference and impact the world in ways we can't even imagine.
Tony, I can't thank you enough for being on the journey that you were on and sharing it with us, so that we don't have to go on that same journey, because that was not an easy journey that you're still on, that we're all still on. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to share that I was a bad host and forgot to ask you before we sign off?
No, I think we covered quite a bit. I think
a lot. It was
awesome, and I really enjoyed the interview.
Me too. Tony, where can people go to find out more about you and really embrace how to overcome hate around them and inside themselves?
You can check out my book, available on Amazon. That's The Cure for Hate, a former white supremacist journey from violent extremism to radical compassion. You can find me at thecureforhate.com. You can email me at tony@thecureforhate.com. And if you want to check out our documentary film that is just hitting the festival circuit as we speak, that you can find that at thecureforhatefilm.com. And it's also on Facebook and Instagram and all of your
awesome
regular social media things.
And it's all in the show notes, folks. Tony, I can't thank you enough, and I can't thank Dove enough for bringing us all together into this magnificent world together. So, Tony, thanks again for coming on.
And keep doing the great work you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Forged by Trust. Remember, if you want to forge trust, it's not how you make people feel about you that matters, it's how you make them feel about themselves. If you're interested in more information about how I can help you forge your own trust building, communication, interpersonal strategies as your speaker, coach, or as a trusted advisor for you or your organization, please visit my website at www.peopleformula.com. I'm looking forward to sharing my next Forged by Trust episode with you next week. We chat with the world-renowned Neil deGrasse Tyson about his starry messages.